So today we have Matt Quackenbush. Love the last name.
Thanks,
You're a
man.
trauma therapist, public speaker, researcher, writer. You also have Finding Strength podcast, and you're a trainer. It was a director of education training at Deer Hollow, and that's why I
Yeah.
looked you up because I just talked to Tall Tim, who was awesome, and he spoke very highly of you, as well as mentioned some of his experiences with your classes that kind of jumped out to me. And I just want to get more information on that. So if you could just introduce yourself, talk about yourself briefly, and then after that, we'll jump into it.
Right on, man. Yeah. Matt Quackenbush. That's the name, dude. You can't forget that name. That's what I tell people.
Never.
It's not that it's easy to remember, it's that it's hard to forget. It's kind of how
As soon as I heard your name, I walked around the house and I was like, Quackenbush. And is that who you're having on? I'm like, yeah. I was like, and I was
Yeah.
so excited to wake up this morning to talk to Matt Quackenbush.
Talk to the Quackenbush, dude. Yeah, my whole life, dude. My nickname's been like because Matt is like the most common name on the planet, especially if
Yeah.
you're born in like the early '80s, right? So my whole life I've always been Quack. That's what everybody's always called me. So it's ironic too because I'm like the shrink guy and like Quack and anyway. So
I love it. It's punny.
yeah, it's punny. That's right. Yeah, I've been with Deer Hollow for like 8 years, uh, 7, 8 years. I have a private practice called Finding Strength that is my company that I started about 4 years ago. That does like individual therapy stuff, and I do contracts with treatment centers for to do training and group therapy. I also travel around all over the place doing speaking gigs, conferences, and in individual apartments, educating the first responder community and veteran community on PTSD and trauma. I also recently linked up with a company called First Watch that is a proactive approach to PTSD, trauma, anxiety, mental health treatment, addiction treatment stuff that is very revolutionary. And for sure, we'll get into talking about that. It's just,
Yeah.
anyways, that's a big part of what I do now is trying to get the First Watch gig. Um, I guess I don't know, heard
Out
about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
out
yeah,
there
yeah. Trying to
talked
get
about
out
and
there. Yeah,
discussed. Yeah. I feel like
discussed. Yeah,
first responders, like it took about 10 years for people to really understand like military PTSD. They made that correlation connection.
right.
And I feel like we're slowly getting there with first responders now. And the fact that they haven't been there before us, or I say us as I was former military,
For sure.
it's exciting seeing that finally come to fruition because I feel like that they're on even another level. Military sees like I would say extreme situations, whereas I feel like the first responders see the consistent, situation and trauma. So it's just like compounding at a higher rate per se. But today, I really want to keep it to PTSD, addiction, and those were the big ones that jumped out to me when we first met because those are kind of your specialties. And I've never really talked to anyone about addiction. So I was going to jump into that one. Like, what is an addiction? Like, I imagine it has to serve some sort of purpose or we wouldn't see such a high rate of it.
Yeah, yeah, man. So the academic definition is continued use or practice despite negative consequences. Simplest way you can put addiction, right? If I do something and it negatively affects me, and then I keep doing that thing despite that negative effect, probably has something to do with my addiction to that thing. And the way addiction works in the brain is very interesting because kind of like if you think about the brain in like two components, it's the easiest way to do it. Like you have like a subconscious and a conscious, or like a survival brain and like a logical live brain, kind of would be the easiest way to do it. That survival brain is constantly scanning the world, hyper vigilantly, more or less, looking for new tools, techniques, methods, coping mechanisms, we call them, to keep us alive.
Mm.
And the major kind of like input for the brain to indicate that it could get bad soon is always pain or something new or uncomfortable, right? So novelty, pain, uh, anything that's going to create some sort of unexpected result, but it's also expected because we know what possibly will happen. So my brain is constantly calculating how bad this could go and then mitigating that, trying to protect against that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why one of your brain's major kind of jobs is to inhibit or stop things from happening. So if I'm uncomfortable and I feel anxious, that's my brain giving me a signal saying, hey, there's something that could go bad here. Let's think about this. And what happens to the brain is it becomes more or less addicted to the thinking process and trying to figure out how to stop the bad thing from happening. And it does this loop over and over and over and over. And so the brain becomes fixated on behaviors, on stuff, right? And addiction is when the brain becomes fixated on something that aids in the mitigation of stress process. So alcohol is probably the easiest example of this. It's a really fantastic mitigator.
Yeah.
It is amazingly efficient at reducing stress quickly. For that reason, your brain just freaking loves it. The moment you get into this stressed out, anxious state, your brain can get alcohol in its system and immediately lower things back down into this regulated, calm place that we want to be all the time. So addiction can be anything that does that for you. And that's kind of the key point. It is something that gets you calm, regulated, back to a normal, familiar place for you. You're not doing it yourself. You're getting something else to do it for you. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, it's easy.
And well, I mean, it seems like it, right?
Yeah.
Like
The
that, like
long-term consequences aren't the easy way for sure.
Right.
But
right. And I think this is kind of like where when you get into like addiction stuff, people are like, well, this is easy or whatever. I think we should be really deliberate about our language around addiction because I think easy is a good word to describe kind of how it seems, but it's not really about easy. It's familiar. That's the key. It's the thing that I'm used to doing, right? And the brain's super focused on doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over.
mm-hmm.
So it might not be easy. This might be a really difficult, elaborate process that I do that's very painful. But because I've done this for so long, my brain thinks there's no other way. So I'm just going to keep doing this thing over and over and over. So addiction work is really grounded, and trauma work is really grounded in this idea of being mindful and stepping back and observing and noticing my habits, my behaviors, what I do day in and day out. Is this working for me? Is this not working for me? What are the consequences of this particular thing that I do? And is that actually the result that I want? What do I want? And so the kind of the foundation for all therapy stuff really becomes this mindfulness thing that we hear about all the freaking time. Anyways,
right.
There's a lot for you.
Yeah, I want to pull back. I got 3 things out of there. So addiction
Go for it.
Isn't always a substance. That kind of jumped out at me. It's not just alcohol. It could be drugs. It's not just drugs. It could be food. It could be overworking. It could be anything that de-escalates stress. Like something that jumped out to my personal, like if I get stressed or slightly overwhelmed, I always clean my house. Step one, I clean my house, and it makes me feel better because my house looks better. It's a quick, I guess you can see the efforts of your labor, and it makes me feel better. So that's one of those that I do that I definitely am familiar of. So the other one is alcohol. Why is alcohol so good at or bringing down your stress levels? Like, what's the nerdy?
Man. It's freaking sugar, bro. That's why.
Really?
Oh, dude, your body, we run off of sugar, right? Like if I go into this fight or flight state, it's because, or if I go into any stress state at all, it's because my liver is taking glycogen and converting it into glucose so that I can use it to create energy, right? alcohol is fermented sugar. I mean, you cannot make alcohol without sugar.
Right.
And so it's a naturally occurring compound in the body. And what it does is it alcohol gets into the system and it creates this chemical called acetaldehyde. And you want some nerdy? There's a big nerdy word
I
for you.
love it, man.
And acetaldehyde is a poison.
Acetaldehyde.
Yeah, big word. It's a poison, and it takes days to get out of your system. And your body starts to run off of this acetaldehyde, and that's the thing that makes you feel drunk. And it lives in your system for several days because the body has a really hard time processing this through your liver. And because of that, your body creates this very strong chemical bond or dependency with this alcohol stuff because it's so kind of like familiar. There's that word again, surprise, to us. And so the moment I consume it, my body goes like, oh, I know what this is. This is like all that other stuff that makes us have energy, but it also calms us. It's much more complex than we ever really understood. And only until like the last really 5 to maybe 20 years, we've done this really big deep dive into like the health effects of alcohol. And unfortunately, and I say that as a person who enjoys a drink,
same,
right? Like it would be awesome if it didn't have all these negative consequences, but it just really does. Like it's one of the worst things for your health. Like if you want to create dementia, if you want to, toxify your brain and put your body into a survival state for like 72 hours. Like one of the things I learned about alcohol was mind blowing was like, if you want to lose weight, your body has to use fat, right? Not lose weight, but lose fat, right? If you want to lose fat on your body has to use fat as its source of energy to burn fat, right? And turn fat into sugar. But when you put alcohol into the system, your body is burning the alcohol off for 3 days and it cannot burn fat. So you go to the gym within 3 days of drinking, you're not burning fat. You're still burning off that alcohol. You're detoxing yourself. Isn't that crazy, man?
It's wild, yeah.
It really is. And it is a super big bummer because alcohol, I mean, it's this wonderful social lubricant for people.
It is.
Right? Like that is the Western answer to social anxiety. And we've become so dependent on it as a society. It's really a part of our culture. So we just have to get really, culturally have a big conversation about like, okay, what is the role of alcohol in our culture? And within the first responder culture, that conversation is amplified because it's not just the social lubricant, it's the medicine, it's the answer, it's the end of the day, ritual that I use to move past all the shit that I dealt with all day long and into this state of sleep that I need every single night. And what alcohol is doing to sleep is it's obliterating it. I mean, the most important part of sleep for your mental health, alcohol prevents that part of sleep from engaging.
Yeah.
And so, but in the addiction world, right, where we're working a lot with people with alcohol problems and opioid addictions and things like that. The uppers too, right? Like you got meth and cocaine and stuff like that. But really, it's a lot of alcohol and heroin, man. That's like the most that we see in the addiction world. And as you can get people off these substances indefinitely, the health improvements, the life improvements, the mood improvements cannot be understated.
Yeah.
And I think that's just something that's really, kind of like we got to raise an eyebrow to this thing and go like, okay, as people get off this stuff who've been addicted to it, like heavy use for years, they get off of it, they get their lives back on track. And as long as they don't pick up that again, their life stays on track. Like, wow, that thing is very powerful.
Yeah.
Maybe I could be more deliberate about my use. I could be more cautious, more mindful about my use. And then understand like the nature of addiction and understand that is something that is inhibiting my life process. It's designed to stop things from happening. And if I, as a person, continually engage in habits that are stopping things from happening, well, what am I missing out on
Yeah.
when it comes to life? And anyway, so those are kind of some of the things that I like to think about myself as I evaluate my own relationship with alcohol. It's something that I have really had to cut back on,
I did
and
the same. Yeah. I
yeah,
drank heavy for years, you know, I mean,
yeah,
former combat veteran, that's all we did. And
right.
I definitely saw the benefit. It severed the tie from my emotional trauma. And as soon as I started drinking, it was like that stuff didn't exist. But then I got to a stage where when it came back the next day, it was like 10 times worse. You know, the depression was
Right.
worse. Suicidal ideations were worse. And I was just like, whew. So eventually I did 18 months off. And then after I did that, I realized that I was just using it, you know, and I was ignoring all the traumas and not processing stuff. And then it was all hitting me at once. And that was a rough year. But after that, it was like, oh, I don't need it. You know, I don't need the
Yeah,
booze. And now it's still a social thing, onesie twosies.
for
But
sure.
I was going to ask you, identifying whether or not a coping mechanism is healthy or positive. How would you suggest to someone, like, how do you do that? How do you like say, is my
That's a
alcohol
good
too
question.
much, or am I working to avoid this? You know, like, how do I see if my coping mechanism is an addiction that's negative, or is this a positive, healthy coping mechanism?
Right. Uh, so again, back to the definition: continued use despite negative consequences. If I'm honest with myself, right, and I look at negative consequences for a particular behavior, let's switch off alcohol because I think people get tired of hearing booze get beat up on, even though we could for the whole entire thing. But reality is, obviously, it's clear if you're a regular drinker, reevaluating your relationship with alcohol is important and valuable. Let's just talk about a healthy thing that could turn unhealthy. Exercise, great example, right? So there is a moderate amount of exercise that is very healthy for people. And this is the nature of most things, right? You have extremes. One end of the spectrum, too little, one end of the spectrum, too much. How does one know when they are exercising too much? Well, it's going to affect your sleep. You're going to have a harder time sleeping. It's going to affect your mood because your body is in a depleted energy state. And that's going to raise stress hormones in your body. So you're going to notice yourself becoming more irritable. Um, there's negative, kind of like negative outlook bias, where you're looking at the world and just seeing all this negative shit all the time. It's just like,
Mhm.
complaining a lot. Like if these habits are starting to surface themselves in your lives and you're really mindful and you can kind of look at those habits and go, I don't think that this is how I want to feel. You can backtrack and go, okay, what if I, instead of working out 2 hours a day, or in my case, I used to do CrossFit all the time. I got really freaking buff, and it looked so good, and I was doing all these
Yeah.
competitions, and I was like freaking like felt like the
Hmm.
the man. And I'd walk around, and my legs hurt all the time, and then all of a sudden, my hips started hurting, and I had these like deficiencies in parts of my body. And my body really gave me these clues to just be like, hey, man, this isn't working for you. So, again, back to mindfulness. If we get really good at listening to our body and understanding what it's trying to tell us, it's going to clue us in to what is and is not working when
Hmm.
it comes to my mood, my sleep, my irritability, my pain in my body. Inflammation is a huge indicator of of ill health, right? And if I'm having this chronic pain stuff all the time because I'm inflamed and I'm eating ibuprofen like crazy, like, here's the old Bill Engvall, here's your sign, right? Like,
Right.
take a step back, right? Like, maybe this lifestyle thing that I'm doing is not working. What could I tweak to make it better?
Hmm.
And so, um, yeah, that's kind of a good
Yeah.
analogy, I think.
I think so
Yeah.
too. So then that brings me to, you just identified that you have a habit or an addiction. It's negative. It's negatively impacting. How do you break that habit? And I know
So
like
my
each one of them
yeah,
has like, you know, if you're talking heroin and uh alcohol, sometimes you may need like severe professional help, you know, because those can be like very addictive, or methamphetamines. But like, how would you go about breaking an addiction?
the severity matters for sure. Um, the first step, is the 12 steps stuff. It's admit to myself that I got a problem. I got to be
Yeah.
real honest. And then I got to probably talk to somebody and get some help with this thing, and get vulnerable and say, "Hey, can you, partner, person, spouse, friend, buddy, therapist, partner at work, stranger person at a 12-step meeting, can you help me evaluate my relationship with this particular behavior, substance, thing?" And that is by and large the best way to go about it. But that's the scariest thing to do, is like go get help. But this is not something that we really do well on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the big hiccup in the first responder community, where we're now talking about kind of the thing everybody associates with weakness, which is vulnerability. Admitting to myself that that I'm struggling with something, that's hard enough. Telling somebody else that I've admitted to myself that I struggle with something, bro, that's not easy to do.
Yeah.
But that's the key. It's asking for help, and it's realizing that, the overarching issue within life is like, we all struggle. We all have addictive stuff. We all have habits. We all have things that are hard for us. We all suffer, essentially. And that suffering is lessened when we shoulder the burden together. And so as I go out and do all these talks all over the place, like the main thing that I really do, the thing that kind of hits home the most with people is like, we have to work together better. We gotta normalize this talking about it thing. And that's why this podcast is so important. And all this kind of like grassroots effort to get the word out that, like, hey, you're not alone. There are things out there that can help you. And doing this alone is what you've been doing. That's probably not gonna keep working.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I think that's a good answer for that, is get help. And then last thing, right? Like, not last thing, but another thing. If I had to start with one thing with somebody and they didn't want to, ask for help, I would change my diet.
Yeah.
It's like a weird thing to do, but it really is so influential on how my stress states, operate and function. And just cutting back on sugar is so valuable. Just
Mm-hmm.
reduce, like, eating protein in the morning, like getting rid of all carbohydrates in the morning and just eating a bunch of protein and some fat in the morning, reducing carbohydrates. Just doing that to the breakfast meal only will affect your life in such a positive way that it's almost like this domino thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be this initial motivator to get you the kind of the gumption, the energy,
The energy for
the
sure.
yeah, that you need to go and ask for help and to make these other
Mm-hmm.
changes. So start with diet, exercise, obviously a good one, and then get some help, get people to help you. And I
Yeah.
I know I know some people. If you guys need somebody to help you, you can always call me. So
I, we're definitely going to get to that, because I definitely want people to reach out to you. Because
oh,
I
for
saw
sure,
Tim,
yeah.
he's talking about how he saw many of your speeches and talks, and he's like, and it took me about the fourth one to finally go talk to this guy. And I was like, I want to talk to the quack. So next I'm going to dive into PTSD, because I feel like you kind of dabbled on it there, getting help. And it almost seemed like you were hinting that there may be a stigma or surrounding this PTSD topic. Do you feel like there's a stigma?
But not only do I feel like there's a stigma, there is now loads of research into the stigmatization of reaching out for help. In the academic world, the term, the jargon that is used is called treatment seeking. And there is copious research on this idea of treatment seeking, especially in the veteran community, and now even more so in the first responder community. And I'm studying this thing as I do my own research. And what we found is that the perpetuated stigma of asking for help is so insidious and just harmful to the community of first responders at large that we are now in a major crisis.
I think so
And
too.
this crisis is threefold. And this is very clearly stated in the literature and now being very clearly stated by, national research organizations like Police Executive Research Forum. There's a three-pronged issue: retirement, retention, and recruitment. More people than ever are going into retirement, and more people than ever are going into retirement early. Legitimately, right? There's an issue here where people are like, well, they're retiring early and it's not really PTSD. Sorry, I don't agree with that. I work with these people all day, every day. Sure, maybe a small percentage of people are full of crap and they're taking advantage of the situation. You can't control for that. That will always exist. Yep. The reality is the majority of people retiring early hate their jobs and they want to die because they don't like going to work and they feel helpless. Mm-hmm. And so they quit. And then they go and they quit their jobs, and lo and behold, they're happy. And so they make this correlation. Well, it was the job that was making me unhappy. Reality is that's not true. Mm-hmm. It's the environment, it's the culture within this community that's creating these problems where people are leaving early. Not only that, recruitment is down in some places across the country as much as 60%. We can't get people in the door. And then finally, the biggest problem is retention, right? So what we've learned, and this came out of a Police Executive Research Forum study in 2019, that nationally, within the first 5 years, somewhere in the neighborhood of 69% of new recruits are quitting. They're not retiring, they're just quitting. That's a huge problem. So that's going to put this massive strain on the entire organization, the entire culture as a whole, in organizations as a whole, because now we're overworked, we're overburdened, we're overstressed, and then we have all this media crap that's going on, and it's just this perfect storm. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to work extra hours. I'm going to drink a little more. I'm going to ignore my family. I'm going to double down on my job and my identity as a cop or a firefighter or as a corrections officer, where the problem is worse than in any other community within first responder world, and the cycle continues.
Yeah.
So what the stigma is really, when you look at it, like you take a step back from the stigma is not just, hey, mental health is fake, or this isn't real, or PTSD is bullshit. The stigma is asking for help is not just weak. Asking for help means I will lose everything. Yeah. And so I don't.
Yeah. They're not incentivized to get help. That's what I feel.
No.
So, okay, I want to break it down on a few levels. If you were to suggest, like, how can someone help improve the stigma on a personal level? How could an organization improve the stigma on an organizational level? And how could we, like, big picture, help improve the stigma?
So on an individual level, we'll start there. Inform yourself, get educated, start taking your health seriously. Mm-hmm. As soon as you start taking your health seriously, there's this cascade of really cool positive consequences. Your mood improves, your motivation improves, you get more energy, and then you'll have the wherewithal to be able to do the hard stuff, like take the next step or help somebody else. Organizationally, we need to reevaluate, and this is clear from the research too, we need to reevaluate the peer support dynamic and what that looks like. Because the most important thing, if you look at like anonymous, they call it like survey research. You go out and you survey people anonymously and they tell you what's really going on and what they're concerned about. Number one issue is always anonymity and confidentiality because of the stigma, right? I
100%.
don't want anybody to know that I'm getting help or that I think I even have a problem or that I might have some PTSD symptoms. And so I say nothing. What has happened in a lot of organizations across the country that have worked really, really well is they've kind of like broadened the peer support system so that it's not just in-house, it's like countywide or citywide. So it's multiple organizations working together as a peer support unit so that I don't have to go and talk to the guy that I'm on shift with about my problems. I can go
Yeah.
talk to somebody somewhere else, and I'm not afraid that it doesn't get back to my administration. That has worked really, really well. And also creating organizations that can facilitate that process of asking for help outside of the organization. And that has been shown and is now gaining a ton of momentum all over the place, all across the nation. You're watching these organizations just kind of pop up that are supplementing and aiding the peer support process with expertise and experience. And that's this first watch thing that I talked about earlier. That's really what the aim of programs like that are designed to do, is provide support organizationally on and work in conjunction with the administration to provide this support and really be very, obvious, clear that we have these support systems in place because we care about your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to keep people from quitting. And that should be the major goal, right? Obviously, we want to keep people alive. Yes, that's so true. 100%. That is a byproduct of providing people support.
Right.
Less people will kill themselves if we can give more support. Additionally, less people will quit early. Additionally, less people will get post-traumatic stress symptoms. Additionally, less people will get divorced. Additionally, like there's so many fringe benefits to just creating a systematic process of support that is obvious, that is supported by the administration or on the organizational level.
Right.
And then culturally, just freaking, we got to talk about this. This has to keep being a big conversation, which it is,
I think
which is
so
awesome.
too. I agree.
Yeah.
I actually had a conversation with someone that's not even related to the military or anything the other day. And he had a comment that really, I told him I was going to steal it because it was great. He's like, mental health, it reminds me of sleeping. You don't realize you're asleep until you're awake. And mental health and having issues with mental health, like you don't really realize it until you're familiar with mental health. And you're like, oh, shit. I do have PTSD. Yeah. I've had PTSD, it's like, oh, okay. So I thought that was really cool. And
that's really good.
The other one was, it sounds like you're suggesting like a third party mental health, like for organizations. I always struggled with the VA. I know that I have a lot of friends that are like that too, because it's like, I can only be so honest with a lot of them. I feel like if I'm 100% honest, then all of a sudden, like there's a lot of potential negative consequences of being like getting help and being like, hey, like I'm really upset. And like I'm upset with actually you all, because then it just creates a really bad dynamic. But I like the idea of having a resource that's independent of your organization, because I was talking to a nurse just a while back, and he's like, yeah, I can get help while I work here. He's like, but as soon as I'm unemployed or not employed, and as soon as they say that I have PTSD, no longer, then I have negative consequences about my employability. And then it's like, why would I say anything? And I was like, it's true. That sucks.
Yep.
So PTSD, I feel like there's a lot of people that struggle with like wanting to accept it or wanting to be like, yeah, I think I might have issues. Like, how do we help either? I see it a lot in the older generation as well as the tough guys, and I say that jokingly, but it's a group of people that I spend a lot of time with, like former EOD, former special forces, like some guys like that. They're like, oh, I'm fine. And then they tell you their story and you're like, whoa, bro, are you sure you're fine? It's like, how do you reach those individuals?
Yeah. I think the fear here needs to be very clearly stated. And kind of like, we got to poke holes in this story that like if I start to deal with my problems, the dam's going to break and I'm going to be flooded and it's going to take me out. That's not true. Very, very apparent that that is not true, right? No, there's no dam breaking here. What we're trying to do is create a support system for my body so that it can deal with the stress of life. Over time, the more stress I'm exposed to, the less tolerant I become. If I don't find new ways to cope with stress, that's the key. If I'm constantly relying on the same coping skills for stress, my capacity for stress goes down. And we call this stress tolerance, right? And the word tolerance is like a really interesting thing, right? Like what is tolerance? It's my ability to deal with it, my ability to handle it. So back to the booze thing, right? Your tolerance for booze goes up the more you drink, right? It's the opposite with stress. Your tolerance for stress goes down the more stress you experienced. An inverse relationship. So the longer I'm exposed to stress, the more extreme I experience stress traumatically, right? The more narrow my window of tolerance becomes for stress. And that's the actual term that we use, the window of tolerance. So what we need to understand is that nature's course will take its place. Your window of tolerance for stress will continue to shrink if you do nothing. Your dependence on your current skill set for dealing with stress will increase. And unless you deliberately go about finding new ways to cope with your stress, your window will continue to shrink. So all that means is finding new stuff to do, constantly switching it up, changing your body, and exposing yourself to novelty, to new things, right? One of the best and simplest ways to increase your tolerance for stress is to spend time in nature. The more time we spend in green spaces and blue spaces, the more tolerant for stress we become. Because think about the way that our evolution works. We have been designed to live in the frickin' woods. That's what we did for millennia. That's how and now we live indoors and we have all these creature comforts and we're super intolerant of stress because we're so comfortable. So exposing myself to discomfort in nature, right? Walking around, looking, hiking, doing strenuous things that aren't over strenuous, but that's kind of sweet spot is going to increase my tolerance for stress. My 100% favorite thing to get people to do, and anybody who's heard me talk before will know what I'm about to say, it's get in the cold. I absolutely love the cold. Even though I hate it, it is my number one favorite intervention to get people to do is start taking cold showers. And it is, you want to talk about a healthy addiction? Bro.
Yeah.
It is unreal how wonderfully addictive in a positive way. And it's really just habit for me. Addictive is probably the wrong word because there's no negative consequences to it. But it has so many unbelievable health benefits, from fat loss to energy production, to mood boosting, to HGH, to sleep, to all these things. And it takes minutes. There's nothing more effective. There really isn't. And this is now being even more heavily researched than ever before. In 2 to 3 minutes a day, you can change your life. Literally change your freaking life. That is not hyperbole. Like and I wish more people would take this to heart and just try it, because it, like I said, it's this domino effect. You start just with one little shift, and then all of a sudden your brain's like, "Huh,
yeah,
that's kind of cool. Like, I wonder what other new, cool, hard stuff might feel good."
Yeah.
So
I definitely started doing ice plunges, I would say like 3 months ago. I was doing it more I read some of the mental health benefits as well as like if you suggested, caffeine 20 minutes before opens up your dopamine receptors. And then when you jump in, it releases all these dopamines and you just get a rush and feel super happy, which I felt pretty good. It definitely helped me
Yeah.
with my recovery because I do like to exercise and work out too. But I feel like if you do that for me, I did it every morning, like
Yeah.
first thing in the morning. And if you can do that first thing in the morning, I feel like all the other things that later on throughout the life are just pretty cruise and easy to get
It's
over
pretty
because,
great.
yeah, it does. Don't do it just once, do it for 3 weeks. Because the
Yeah.
first time
Yeah.
you
At
do it, you're like,
least.
that's stupid. You're like, I'm never doing
Horrible.
that again. But
It's
it gets easier
horrible.
and better. Um, let's see here. So let's jump into your podcast, Finding Strength.
For sure.
What is your goal with Finding Strength?
So I started this podcast about almost 5 years ago now. Yeah, it's been a while. No, 4 years ago. Anyways, I started because as a therapist, I would sit down with people and I would just like my job was to sit with people and say, "Tell me about yourself. Tell me your life story.
Mhm.
Let's hear about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I really, really, really want to hear about the bad. Like what's been rough for you? Just tell me and be as emotional and vulnerable as you want. And let's work together to figure some stuff out. Let's just have a conversation." And that's kind of like an initial first session, right? They call it an assessment, but I had some really, really amazing mentors who were able to kind of explain the concept behind therapy rather than like the logistics of it. And so I just came up with this way of just sitting back and just like, tell your story, man. Let's hear it. And I would hear these incredible, amazing stories that were so inspiring. And I'd leave after, an hour, hour and a half listening to this person tell me all the stuff they've been through. And they would like have this relief and they'd smile and we'd feel close and we'd connect and we'd create all this safety so we could talk about it again. And I was like, man, people need to hear this. And so we started the podcast.
That's
And it
awesome.
first started out, yeah. So that's the idea of the show is just to like tell us your story. And then I'll chime in with some stuff and the co-host will chime in with some stuff. And it's evolved over the years. The first few seasons, the co-host was is a what was a really, really good friend of mine, Bethany Tenney. About 7 years ago, her daughter died suddenly. And the very first episode is the co-host, Bethany, telling her story of what it's like to lose her daughter. And it's unbelievably powerful to
Oof.
hear this woman break down and explain what it's like to bury her own child. It's
Mhm.
wildly emotionally motivating. And it gives you this incredible perspective on your life. And not like most people are like, oh man, I just realized how good I have it. No, I don't think that's it. The idea of the podcast is to help people recognize the strength that lives within the human. There is limitless strength inside of
Yeah,
you right now. She's a human. I'm a human. You're a human. All these people are all human. The capacity we have for resilience and strength and overcoming difficulty is limitless. And these stories kind of highlight that. So
that's
it's
cool.
it's it's been a really cool journey to kind of sit down and listen to people. And some of them are like skills based. We have an episode on the cold. We have episodes on stress and trauma
Mhm.
and stuff like that, and mindfulness. And we go to a float spa for one of them and talk about what's like to do the float spa thing. And but a lot of them are stories. There's a lot of stuff about some religious trauma. There's stuff about people coming out as gay. There's stuff about, relationships. There's stuff about PTSD,
Mhm.
trauma, cops, firefighters, veterans, and the like. It's a quite the wide variety, addiction. And yeah, I really enjoy doing it. It's
It
super fun.
sounds awesome.
Right?
I'm similar to you. I like the stories. I like hearing people's journey. Mine's pretty much tailored to PTSD and how they improve the quality of their life after
Hmm.
making that leap. Because I feel like everyone's stuck at that spot where they're like, I don't have
Yeah,
PTSD. I don't have issues. But then when they actually like lean into it and be like, yeah, I do. And then the quality of life drastically improves. Like, that's the fun part for me. I'm like, that's cool,
for
and
sure.
sharing, like, we're all different, like what made that person take the leap is different than what made
Right.
me take the leap, and I feel like everyone that may be listening is the same way, they're like, oh, that resonates with me. So
about
I
that?
missed a comment when we were talking PTSD. So I'm going to take one step back about Tim.
You're
And
good.
Tim's exercise that he said that you did with him was um, wrote down a little note, like a comment on the note of something that he would tell himself in his mind. And then and you passed it out to the entire class and you're like, read it. And everybody would read that one line at the same time. And then you would say louder and louder and louder. And it just sounded like chaos. And it really resonated with Tim. And I was like, is that like, how did you come up with that idea? Is that like a common thing for people with PTSD? Like having, because that's wild. Because I know I get overstimulated, like if I do get triggered, and then it's like,
Yeah.
that's a red flag for me to like, hey, take a step back, reevaluate what's going on here, de-escalate. But I was just curious, like how you came up with that idea.
Well, I think a kind of like a foundational idea for any type of intervention like that is the way that the brain works is much like a computer. It works off of software, and that software runs the program that is your perception of the world. So, in therapy and really in just work, right? Self evaluation, the main thing that we're doing eventually, after we kind of like regulate the system and get more stress tolerance and get things, you know, stable, is we begin to evaluate what are called mental models or belief systems. And that's the software that runs in my head in the background all day long, every day. And it's creating my perception of the world. And if I believe that I am a bad person, or that I am a failure, or that there is something wrong with me, or that I am hopeless, or that the world is a terrible, yucky, awful place, or that no one loves me, or yada, yada, yada. There's so many different mental models that creates this picture, this lens that I view the world through. And that's how I see everything. It's filtered through that. And if I can find out what that filter is and pull it out and look at it and go, is this accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Is this reality? This is the way I see things, but that might not be true. And mindfully reevaluate that lens through which I view the world, this mental model, we can change how we see the world. And that significantly changes your quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in an exercise like that, what that is designed to do is really, highlight the systematic overwhelm that we experience when our mental model for the world
Mm-hmm.
is contrary to reality. And for Tim and others, myself included, right? Like when you hear this being, you know, screamed, I'm a terrible person, or, it's all my fault, or whatever, it resonates with the body
Mm-hmm.
so viscerally, and it's uncomfortable. And you can really see how contrary this is to the way that you function. It doesn't work for you. And so that's kind of the idea behind that. I use a lot of what are called somatics, where I use body interventions
Yeah.
to help people feel what it is that works for them and what doesn't. And that one is it's intense.
Yeah.
That can get
No,
pretty gnarly.
sounds pretty good. Like if I didn't, I don't know, if I had just started my mental health journey and like that was one of my first experiences, I probably would have lost it. Because that when he said it, I was like, that's exactly what it used to feel like. It was just chaos in the brain, just all the hate. You're a piece of shit. You're not good enough. Like all of this stuff. And
Yeah,
now it's usually pretty quiet. And I'm like, yeah,
that's awesome, man. Yeah,
uh,
but that's the point, right? The point is
yeah.
to overwhelm the system in a controlled way and mindfully observe that. If I can do that habitually as a process,
Mm-hmm.
day in and day out in my life, right? That's why journaling is so valuable, self-reflection, meditation. That's what these practices are designed to do, is create a framework for self-evaluation so that I can ask myself, hey, is this true? Is this accurate? Is this reality?
Mm-hmm.
And compare the two. It's really, really, really cool. And if you can learn how to do that in a structured, habitual, practiced way, you're going to improve your quality of life like nobody's business, man. It's pretty cool. And
Exactly.
that's the cool thing about therapy stuff. everybody gets all freaked out, like, is therapy? I gotta go talk about, my mommy issues or whatever, like, sure, maybe a little bit. But truth is, it's not that painful.
No,
It's really, really powerful. It's more powerful than it is painful.
I felt like
And
they taught me
go ahead.
tools. It was
Yes.
like I got in there and the first few times sucked because it was like, why are you here? And it's like, and I'd have to like vomit all this nonsense. And then after that, they're like, well, have you ever tried this? And then I started
Right.
trying that, which then you see the reward of that little effort, And I felt like I started everything that I was working on was very shallow, And once I started, I guess, improving and being able to identify and work internally, I
Yeah.
was able to go other levels, which then leveled up my life, like the quality of my life. Like my first thought every morning was suicide. I was like, I'm done. I'm like, this is stupid. It's like, it's exhausting just living. And now I wake up, I'm like, sweet. It's like, I'm ready to rock, and like for that to be an option, like I never thought it was possible. And yeah, I think it's really cool. Just learning those first few tools and then not only just applying it because like those tools you can reapply later once you start being able to
Yeah.
identify things at a deeper level too. So I don't know. I find it fun,
I
but
love it.
I think I'm
It
just
is
a bit,
fun.
yeah, I think it's great.
No, it really, and that's the thing that I want people to understand. Like, it's fun. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It is the natural process of life. Like, this is what everybody's supposed to do. You're supposed to step back and reevaluate. Is this working for me? Is it not?
Yeah.
And we just have found really effective ways to do that work quickly. And it's not so arduous and painful and drawn out. It's tactical. And we're
Yeah.
really being very, very deliberate about what it is that we're choosing to focus on. And somebody gets in my office, man, I've literally sat down for tens of thousands of hours and listened to people tell me about their lives. And we've come up with incredible solutions and options for people that they try. And through trial and error, through experimentation, we've learned what works and what doesn't. And this is all based on not just my own anecdotal experience, it's based on hundreds of thousands of hours of cumulative expertise.
Yeah.
And that's what people are missing out on when they say, I don't know, therapy's just, that's just not for me. It's bullshit. It's for everybody. It's
Yeah.
it's
Right.
and maybe the term therapy is the wrong word. I think I would love to rebrand therapy as experimentation. Let's go do an experiment. Let's
Yeah.
just try something.
Or
Let's do a
strengthen your
little trial and
mind.
error.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're all
Yeah.
about like working out, getting physically fit,
Right.
cardio, things like that. Because you were talking, it reminded me like the tools that I learned in therapy, like CrossFit. You used to do CrossFit. I
Mhm.
hated front
Mhm.
squats. I was never very good at it
Yeah.
until I found
Brutal.
Spencer Arnold 7-13 squat cycle. And then my front squat jumped up like 50 pounds in like
There you
13
go.
weeks. And I was like, whoa. I was like, this is what I should have been doing the whole time. And I feel like mental health's the same way. Like
Same thing.
I started with meditation. Meditation helped, it helped me identify that I was always at a 10. And then after that, other things I added was like jujitsu. I don't know how I landed on jujitsu, but I was reading some scientific
Love it.
journal about attention training. And I'm like, that's like, after I read it, I was like, that really reminds me a lot of jujitsu, So then I went and I tried that and it really helped me walk back the threat avoidance and the threat awareness. It like helped me identify those because
So good.
you're doing that nonstop, So then it's just adding things like that. And I don't know. I think it's awesome. I think
I
we
love
should
it.
rebrand it mental strength because that's what I want to do. Create the
Yeah.
warrior mind so that you're always mentally strong and able to not only see trauma, deal with trauma, but process it in a healthy way and move on.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Jujitsu is rad.
I love
Getting around,
jujitsu.
rolling around with people. So fun. Yeah. I wish I've dabbled or whatever. I've never done it really consistently, but it is really cool. And all that martial
Mhm.
arts stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's just got these, anything that works at creating quality of life follows the same model, uses the same principles, right? Self actualization. I'm in charge of my life. It's up to me. One of my favorite things, I learned this, I've read this awesome book called Inner Engineering by Sadhguru. Just a freaking, oh my gosh, dude. Everybody should read this book. Is this yogi guru guy? and he's all over social media now. He's dope. But he says the only way out is in, which I love. I mean, that's so profound. It's so simple, but so profound.
Mm-hmm.
And if when you're working out, great, analogy. If you're focused on like CrossFit, right? If you're focused on what that guy's doing, what that guy's doing, you're going to screw it up. You're not going to be anything. Like you're just going to be losing your mind trying to keep up. But if you can keep all this stuff out there and go in and focus on what you can do on your breath, right? Just your breath, and just focus on your breathing, all of a sudden things kick up a notch. And that's just a principle of truth throughout all of life. And the better you are at applying in the moment, the more you feel good, the better quality of life you create for yourself, the more fulfillment you experience. Yep. And so all you're doing in the therapy thing is reevaluating how you go in. Mm-hmm. What do you do to go inward? Because you've been so focused on everything's happening out here. It's their fault. It's this, it's mom, it's dad, it's my circumstance. It's all this stuff. It's all this crap that I cannot control. Yep. And then I end up feeling picked on. I end up feeling like life is happening to me. But if I go in, I begin to realize that no, I'm happening to life. Yep. And when I begin to happen, and I understand that I am the happening, that's real deep. Yeah. It is a whole nother level of freedom, And that principle, it shows up all over the place.
Then it gives you the power.
Yeah. And you realize that you're full of it.
Yeah.
You are the power. Yeah.
The reason the quality of my life sucks is because of me. And then it's like, like shit. Well, all right, let's get started. Yeah.
Okay. So true.
Last thing I wanted to hit on was Deer Hollow. That's an awesome organization. You guys are doing awesome stuff out there. Just wanted to talk like what kind of things do you guys provide? How do people get involved? Like how can people help?
Yeah. So Deer Hollow started about 8 years ago as a residential treatment center for addiction. Fast forward about a year and a half into the process, start getting a bunch of first responders. Now, this is 8 years ago, 7-8 years ago, first responder treatment was not the hot item, right? There was no bills on the hill providing, money. There was no PTSD treatment that was sanctioned by organizations, right? This is like the beginning. And that's crazy. That's only like 8 years ago. So we start getting people in. Well, they start getting people in and they start churning through therapists. And because they just can't handle all this, because the cops will come in and sit down and just tell you the worst freaking thing they've ever heard just to kind of test you. Or the firefighters will come in and be like, yeah, I have this burned up baby in my arms. And these therapists are like, what? They can't do it. So they went out and they found Dr. Amy Crawford and myself. And I just kind of have always had thick skin. I don't really mind the dark stuff. I've worked with veterans. I have a background in addiction. My very first job as a therapist was actually working alongside police officers in the treatment resource center, working with parolees and probationers. And I've just kind of always got this world. And then my grandfather was a veteran and have this like veteran family history thing in the Navy. So I get this kind of community. And my friends have always been cops and firefighters. So I just kind of had a knack for it. And Amy has been working with veterans on a really, just like incredibly proficient level for many, many years. So she and I created this awesome program and it blew up. It got very, very successful. I moved out of being the clinician type thing at Deer Hollow, and I became kind of like a spokesperson. Mm-hmm. And I started traveling around and doing more groups. And that's why we travel over the place. So we offer trainings for facilities, for individual departments. We also do trainings and talks at conferences and the like. And so we're all over the nation doing all sorts of different talks. and education. And that's really cool. It's kind of like a cool arm of the program that not a
Yeah.
lot of other treatment centers are doing, because
Mhm.
I'm just a massive proponent for education. I think the answer to all of this is information. We just need to
I
freaking
Yeah.
disseminate the truth,
Need to
and that will
understand it.
create.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I'm semi decent at breaking complicated things down and helping
I
people
think you
understand.
crushed it.
Yeah. um, so then Deer Hollow becomes this, you know, banner organization for first responder treatment, heavily trauma focused, working on childhood trauma alongside, work trauma, which is this brilliant niche that we created. And then these other kind of like, the only word you can use is like copycat, but they're not really copy. They're just trying to help, right? But all these other organizations start to pop up, and so now there's a wide variety of these organizations. But Deer Hollow is probably one of the first and kind of the pioneer, so to speak, which is actually
Mhm.
the name of the first house, called the Pioneer House. And we now have three. We have Pioneer, Trailside, and Mountainside. Three facilities. It's small. They're like houses. It's not a big organization, right? They're not in some big hospital like building. It's like these houses. We bought residential homes. There's like a private chef. You're there for 30 to 45 days on the residential side of things, and you go in and get this incredible treatment, doing tons of therapy with these other awesome cops and firefighters and veterans and corrections officers and dispatchers and nurses and professionals, right? And then we have a house that's focused on major trauma stuff, just trauma focused. And we have another one that does more trauma and addiction. And then another house that works on like the professional side of things, where it's not as much veteran cop oriented, more
Mhm.
professionals. And we also have a step down program called a partial hospitalization program, where it's 5 days a week, 5 hours a day, where you come in, and that's kind of like for locals, but also people fly in and they stay in one of the houses, and it's less intensive, um, because not everybody needs 30 to 45 days of round the clock care. Some people don't need that, and so it's just less. And we're working on life skills and integration and things like that. And then a step down from that is what's called intensive outpatient, or IOP, which is 3 days a week for 3 hours, and that is in person, or we now have a very robust online presence doing telehealth, just like Zoom stuff,
Yeah.
IOP, which is very, very, very effective. And that's what a lot of people have done that has been super helpful for them. That's what Tim did. And step down from that is we have, general outpatient stuff that's available as well, that we kind of usually refer out to others. But the main thing that we do at Deer Hollow is we want everybody to contact us first, because we're also a major hub for referrals. And
Right.
we refer most people to other places because we're quite full usually. But because we're this hub, we have an expert team of kind of like, I don't know, assessment analysts, and we're really good at assessing. And our admissions team is bar none the best admissions team I've ever seen. I worked at lots of treatment centers; they're incredible, and they get people to the right places and heal people really, really, really quick. Additionally, within the last 2 years, we partnered with an organization called First Watch, and this is a whole nother venture. So you have like tail end, kind of like reactive treatment, like I just described. That's the Hollow model. Like things are getting bad and we need some help, right? Um, and there's varying degrees of help at that stage, where things are like, things aren't, I'm not doing so hot. Like I need to go get somebody to help me figure this out.
Yeah.
On the front end of things, doing preventative care, doing education, that's First Watch. And what First Watch does is First Watch partners with entire departments and supplements the EAP process and provides wellness checks and oversight for every single individual in the department, their spouse, and their dependents.
Mhm.
They're able to get individual sessions once a year, really checks once a year, and then as many therapy sessions as they want throughout the year, if that's something that they would like to do. And this is done through the department itself. And it's this incredibly creative model that I have never been more excited for, because it's working super well. We're
That's
catching stuff
awesome.
early. The morale in these departments that have signed up for this program have improved significantly. And anyways, I'm really excited about that. So that's kind of our new venture that we're working on. First Watch Wellness is what you want to look up. And you go to deerhollowrecovery.com. Yeah, and we'll post like phone number in the show notes and stuff like that. It's
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
886 we know. I can't remember what it is. I should know that off the top of my head, but I don't. But yeah, there's a phone number you can call.
Yeah, I'll add it for sure. I
For
find that
sure.
really interesting because I was just in Ukraine talking with some of the researchers and psychologists about what they're implementing for the social, like for the whole community. And it was really fun. Some of the things that you hit on, education, they're teaching kids about PTSD,
Yep.
teaching kids about how to, stay focused on the things that are important, family, sleep, food, stuff like
Yep.
that. So
Yep. That
awesome.
is definitely the key.
I don't want to, I know you're busy. So that's everything
No,
that
you're good,
I
man.
had. If you wanted to wrap up or had anything you want to touch on that we might have missed, I'll give you an opportunity for that. But other than that,
Sure.
I think you crushed it. And I
So
really appreciate your time.
thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Yeah. So phone number for Deer Hollow, I just looked it up. 888-5-WE-KNOW, WEKNOW, and that will hook you up with anybody in the Deer Hollow process. My email, I have two. You can do Matt at Deer Hollow Recovery or Matt at finding-strength.com. Also, check out my podcast, Finding Strength Podcast, found on all the platforms. And if you guys need anything or you're interested in doing therapy stuff, I do have the private practice. Reach out. I will be happy to work with anybody. I really appreciate this opportunity, man. It's been great. It's
Awesome.
super awesome to meet you.
Yeah, you too, man. I hope to get meet you in person. I think that'd be really cool.
Yes.
I want to go
Yes.
check out one
Yes.
of your talks. Currently,
Yeah.
Hawaii's super far away from anywhere that you may be doing. But if I get back to the mainland here, probably around
Well,
February, I'll look you up.
I'm working with an organization called Brothers in Healing. They're this awesome charity organization. And we're trying to do a kind of like I guess a talk stint out in Hawaii. So
I'll be there.
hopefully, Woody, Chris, please, brothers, I would love to go to Hawaii.
Yeah, I would.
But yeah,
Suggestion, I would probably shoot for somewhere near Lahaina. I know their first responders were hit hard with that big fire that they had.
Yeah,
so,
and that's kind of been the need lately, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, thanks, man. This was really great. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, man. You have a good day, Mr. Quack. And I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, man.
Bye.